And we are off. So this is the fourth and final session of Dreamwork. And um, and it's it's kind of the culmination, I guess, of what we've talked about. I mean, um it's interesting where we're going today, and we've certainly come a long ways. Um, I I want to say you guys have blown my mind as much as I guess maybe I've blown yours. This has been just a great learning experience for me, and it's just been wonderful. I love it. Like all the dreams and everything that's coming out, and the things that people are sharing with me and stuff. It's just been fabulous. Um, so I wanted to start with a quote from Jung that kind of is going to bookend the this seminar, this session. So he says the union of opposites on a higher level of consciousness is not a rational thing, nor is it a matter of will. It is a process of psychic development that expresses itself in symbols. And, you know, the interesting thing about this process is that it expresses itself in symbols, and that means that even for us to communicate it, we also need to use symbols. Um, and today we're going to look at more of these symbols and sort of how they tend to emerge in the process. I don't want to say that even the 12 steps themselves are a group of symbols, right? And within that group of symbols, there's more symbols. So kind of like a play within a play. But so and so and we're looking at a really common mythological motif. Um, and the reason is these images are archetypal, right? So that means that the images that show up in my dreams, the ones we're going to look at today, are very likely the same images that will or have shown up in your dreams. They're the same images that show up in myth, right? Um, and because and what we're looking at here is sort of this language of symbolism, which is the language of the unconscious. And like any language, as daunting as it can be to learn how to get fluent in a language, right? There's only so many words and so many forms and so many variations. And I think the same thing is true of this symbolical world that we're looking at, that once we are able to see and to sort of put on our symbolic glasses, so to speak, then we start to see these patterns repeat. And then hopefully then we can start to see them repeating within our own psyche. That's been really mind-blowing for me, is to discover these images within myself. It really makes me feel connected. It really makes this life that we're living, it gives it this kind of cosmological significance, right? It sort of tells us that there's something there in the unconscious, right? Something, and it wants to express itself through us, through our being human. So I'm going to read this quote from Edinger, sort of an introduction. We've done this each week, just to tie everything together. It says, what makes alchemy so important to depth psychology and dream interpretation is that it was the first sizable effort of the Western psyche to pry the archetypal images out of their theological matrix, out of their creedal context, where they were set like concrete, and make them available for individual psychological experience. And what we've been looking at really as Westerners, right, is these two forms of symbolism, or this single form, I guess, that emerged and sort of diverged just before the birth of Christ. And what we had was sort of the ecclesiastical version up above on the surface, and then below the surface we have alchemy and Gnosticism. And these two systems sort of complement each other more. It's more accurate to say that the alchemical system seems to compensate the ecclesiastical system. So just a kind of a quick review of that. Jung was a student of this language of symbolism, and he said, and I love this quote, he said, it appears that the unconscious is trying to enter consciousness by means of all sorts of illusions and analogies. And then this is the key I love, or that it is making more or less playful attempts to attract attention to itself. I love that. More or less playful attempts to attract attention to itself. That's kind of what appears to us in dreams, and in active imaginations. You could say that early on in our drinking careers, those might have been playful attempts as well, but they certainly turned dark after a while. So I introduced last week a dream that I'd had of the moon that had the moon was setting, but it had been turned into a giant jack-o'-lantern. And the sky was pitch black, and this jack-o'-lantern moon was glowing. It was glowing this radiant sort of orange reddish glow. And I, as I look at that dream and sort of the pivotal role that it played in my own, you know, searching of my dreams, I see that it certainly was a playful attempt. We've seen this motif repeat. We've seen this image here. I like Revelations 12, 1 and 2. It says, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. So again, we're looking at this exact mythological motif that I've been exploring is going to repeat over and over and over throughout Western culture and the Western psyche. This image represents that same thing, right? This is the woman, right? The anima, Sophia, whoever. She's standing on the moon, and she's blocking the sun, right? And then we have the 12 stars, which are probably a representation of the zodiac, right? Or the cycle, the yearly cycle. This sort of birth and death thing that happens in the myth. This is a phrase that Jung quotes in Mysterium Coniunctionis, and this is one of the more sort of Jung loves this phrase. He quotes it multiple times. So does Edinger. Sow the gold in foliated white earth. Thus, the gold sun and the white earth or the moon are united. And so this is a hyper symbolic statement, right? Sow the gold in foliated white earth. And if we look at the dream of Luna as a jack-o'-lantern, it really is a repetition of that exact sentence, right? If the sun is the gold, then when it enters the moon, which is typically white, right? That's the white earth. Then it turns red and it emanates a different kind of a color. So obviously, right, the underlying sort of psychological interpretation of all of these images is that the goal here is what we talk about in step 11. It's to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. And what that means from a symbolical point of view is that the consciousness is meant to enter into the unconscious, right? And so the sun enters into the moon, what they call an eclipse, right? In astronomy or astrology. Last week, we saw that the union of Sol and Luna creates a new creature. That creature is called Mercurius, pictured here. He's a union of all of these opposites, right? Here we have a man and a woman, the sun and the moon. We have the 12 stars plus one, right? In that little tree thing. He's holding a cup, I guess, with three either eagles or snakes, or he's holding a snake in his would be his right hand, I assume. So anyways, so this Mercurius becomes the child, right? The filius, the son of the conjunction of Luna and Sol. I want to read this from last week. We read this, and it's just a great reminder. He says, this is Edinger. He says, you must always remember that Mercurius is the personification of the autonomous unconscious. The original Mercurius is the unconscious in its original unconscious state. Mercurius as the lapis is the unconscious when the ego has related to it consciously. Out of the original Mercurius, Sol and Luna emerge as the pair of opposites. When these opposites are again united, they give birth to a child, the filius, which is equivalent to the lapis. And so we saw last week how the archetype of the alcoholic is basically an equivalent to Mercurius in as much as they are both paradoxical images of wholeness, right? They're representative of the process of wherein we combine the light and the dark, wherein we recognize that our defects are our greatest assets, right? where we become grateful alcoholics or grateful drug addicts or whatever that is. So it's this paradoxical sort of embodiment of the spiritual awakening. This leads us to the Philosopher's Stone. So last week we looked at two dreams, right? The first one was Luna as the jack-o'-lantern. And then there was another dream that I had, which I want to just recount here. I was in a house. It was a family reunion. The owner of the house, which I assume would have been a symbol of the self, has these two huge pets, a pit bull, a very large black pit bull, and an equally large and intimidating mountain lion. The mountain lion and the dog begin to sort of fight, right? And then at that point, the lion lays down on its side with its legs completely stretched out, and it's just utterly docile, while the dog then starts humping the lion, playfully nudging it and then humping it, right? And then from this, all of a sudden, the lion morphs into a newcomer in Alcoholics Anonymous who's standing next to me. And I congratulate him on being willing. So what emerges here then is Mercurius. And what I want to read here is something that we're going to tie into the next dream that happens literally 2 days later. So Jung says the coniunctio of Sol and Luna precedes the production of the lapis, which is understood as the child of Sol and Luna. And so I had that dream, still didn't know what it meant. And then 2 days later, I had this, what I'm calling a dream. It says, I wake up, lying in my bed, I see a glowing red square orb pegged to the southwest corner of the ceiling. The glowing red light from this otherworldly object fills the room. I stare at it in awe, for it looks like it is alive. I can't figure out what it is, and I wonder if it might be an alien of some sort. When I fall back to sleep, I dream that the glowing red square orb is the source of inspiration for my book. When I wake up again, the room is pitch black, which surprises me, as I had fully expected to see that a light from a clock or cell phone had caused me to hallucinate a glowing red orb. So this is the next dream in this sequence. And remember, we're talking about the lapis philosophorum, which is equivalent to Mercurius. The first thing I want to say, this was a really weird dream. It took me a while to realize I was dreaming. And it just seemed so real. It was the weirdest thing in the world, right? Like if you were to put me on a light, I don't know, like the more I read about Jung and stuff, I'm like, man, that felt like a dream, but what if it wasn't, right? Like, who knows? Like the psyche, the things that take place in our minds are just as real, if not more real than the things that happen out in this world that we assume is the only real one. That's what living the symbolic life has kind of told me and taught me. So when I was preparing this lesson this week, I found a couple drawings from Jung, this being one of them. I'm very interested in this drawing. I wasn't familiar with it when I had the dream. We've probably seen it before, but the glowing red orb had like scales on it. It almost looked just like this, and it was kind of moving. It was like it wasn't moving, but like the skin was kind of moving. It was just like glowing, right? So, and the other thing that I want to point out here too is the Luna as jack-o'-lantern appeared in this pitch black sky, and also this glowing red orb appears in this pitch black room. So the dreams are amplifying one another, right? Now, and then one more thing is that the orb appears in the southwest corner of the ceiling. So that becomes significant later on. It becomes highly significant later on. Now, and what I'm trying to do here, guys, is just really kind of show you. So I have these dreams, right? And how do I create meaning out of the dreams, right? How do I make meaning, and how do I make a myth from this stuff? So, like Mercurius, the Philosopher's Stone is a paradoxical image of wholeness. It's a stone. This refers to the coagulatio. To coagulate means to create, to make solid, right? So when blood coagulates, it creates a scab or whatever. In terms of alchemy, coagulatio meant to bring something out of the air and manifest and put it on the earth, right? Or to turn an airy substance into a solid substance, right? So in terms of like psychologically speaking, when the ego brings something into consciousness, when we improve our conscious contact, when we actually do that, it's a coagulatio. So for example, if you had a dream that you fall from a great height and you like land on the ground, the going up was the sublimatio, right? And the falling down is the coagulatio. So, and the thing about interpreting dreams like this, like a falling dream, for example, is it depends on who you are and what type you are. And we're going to talk about types a little bit later. But like if you're a thinking intuitive type and you're always up in the clouds, then a dream about the coagulatio and a falling is not such a bad thing. So I've had a couple of dreams lately of me falling and crashing. Like one time I backed my car up in this dream, and then I dreamed that the car flipped over backwards and literally did like 3 twists in the air like this, and then boom, landed on the ground in this big crash. And that's a dream of the coagulatio, right? So for me, because I'm always up in the clouds, it's not such bad news. Often the ego would interpret these things as like being really bad, but maybe they're not so bad. Maybe they're good, right? The dreams become great reflections and really helpful instruments to help us see where we are in the journey. And I'm going to hopefully be able to describe some of that later as I go through the rest of these dreams. These are just a couple statements that I have about the lapis philosophorum, so we get an idea of what it is. Stone is the essence of everything solid and earthly. It represents feminine in matter, a conjunction of above and below. So here, the philosopher's stone then becomes another symbol similar to Mercurius, right? But what's reintroduced here is this concept of Sophia that was trapped in matter. So now in the philosopher's stone, she's alive in there, right? So that the stone becomes living. The next one is that the philosopher's stone is inert as a metal or a stone, and yet alive like an organic being. And so that really struck me, because in my dream, the stone, whatever it was, it seemed like it was alive. Like I almost thought it was like an egg, like a cosmic egg or something. Finally, it is the stone that is no stone, the stone that hath a spirit. And so as a living organism, right, the stone is a paradox, because stones are not alive, right? They are by definition not living beings. So again, this symbolism is more of a continuation of the paradox of wholeness that we've been talking about so much. From a psychological perspective, the coagulatio consists in an improved conscious contact with the unconscious. And like I said, when the ego solidifies a symbol and brings meaning into it in life through experience, then the coagulatio is taking place. Step 11 is definitely a coagulatio symbol. Another word that comes up here is rubido, right? Which is the reddening. And the rubido rounds out this alchemical opus, right? It's the third and final stage. It's the process of adding blood into the experience, right? Of making it real. And this is what Jung says. I love this quote. He says, "I'm aware and hope I have made it clear to the reader that merely intellectual understanding is not sufficient. It supplies us only with verbal concepts, but it does not give us their true content, which is to be found in the living experience of the process as applied to ourselves. We would do well to harbor no illusions in this respect. No understanding by means of words and no imitation can replace actual experience. Alchemy lost its vital substance when some of the alchemists abandoned the laboratorium for the oratorium, there to befuddle themselves with an ever more nebulous mysticism, while others converted the oratorium into a laboratorium and discovered chemistry. We feel sorry for the former and admire the latter, but no one asks about the fate of the psyche, which thereafter vanished from sight for several hundred years." And, I think it's a great question to ask, what kind of experience is Jung referring to here, right? And I would answer that Jung is referring to any kind of an experience, so long as it's a real and a sincere and an honest engagement with life, right? And that's why I think the 12 steps are so profound and life-changing, is because I experienced this thing in drinking and using that felt real. It was just absolutely as real as anything I've ever experienced. And then I come into the 12 steps and sort of I'm able to apply some meaning to that journey, right? Some spiritual insight. So I think those of us who have burned our lives to the ground, we do have an advantage when it comes to living this symbolic life, because we've taken that plunge into the dark. That's what Jung is referring to here. And that's a hard plunge to take if you're, I mean, we all understand, right? It's pretty easy to skip along the surface of life and miss the whole thing. I also want to point out this last statement from Jung where he says, no one asks about the fate of the psyche, which thereafter vanished from sight for several hundred years. I've been trying to make the case lately, that Jung's discovery of the psyche, I mean, he was building on Freud, and he was, a couple of other people had sort of, proposed the existence of the unconscious, but Jung really kind of went into it and really started to define it. But I just am blown away by the fact that that's exactly what we sort of celebrate here, right? We take it for granted, I think, but we understand the nature of the autonomous psyche. And that is what gives us so much momentum to move into the world of the spirit. And if anyone has any doubts about how effective the 12 steps can be, you should see me after the meeting, because they are absolutely an effective method of spiritual awakening. I also want to say this, Edward Edinger suggests that Carl Jung has really ushered in sort of a new eon, right? That the Christian age is sort of is dying now, right? I mean, Nietzsche said God is dead, and this new sort of scientific age is dawning, or has dawned, and the age of Aquarius has been ushered in now, and so there's a new God image that's also emerging, right? I do believe that part of what we do here in the 12 steps is to help usher in that new eon, because we are doing the same work that Jung was doing in terms of transforming the God image. Edinger gave us another symbol that depicts this stone, and I wanted to just give a few examples of this so that as these images appear in your dreams, you kind of know what to do with them. This is from Edinger. He says, and he's just talking about an old alchemical recipe. The king prepares a trap to catch a lion, a pit containing his bait, a magical, sweet-smelling stone. The lion, attracted by this sweet smell, falls into the trap and then is swallowed by the stone. So the stone is also an animal creature. The lion is said to have fallen in love with this stone, which is also a woman. So this is another repetition of the same image of the sun, the lion, going into the stone or the moon. This, now the picture I have here of the green lion eating the sun is almost a contaminated image of because the lion represents the sun. But the thing is, now the lion has turned green. So that lion has undergone a change, right? That's a coagulatio. Green is the color of nature, the color of Mother Earth, the color of the forest, right? So it's a feminine symbol. So what's happening here then, and I want to read this quote. Jung says, in alchemy, the lion, the royal beast, is a synonym for Mercurius, or to be more accurate, for a stage in his transformation. He is the warm-blooded form of the devouring predatory monster who first appears as the dragon. So we saw this in my dream when the lion turned into the newcomer in AA, which is, those are like, stages in the transformation. So here, then, what's happening is now this transformed Mercurius figure in this green lion is able to assimilate consciousness and to use consciousness as a tool, and is no longer dominated by consciousness, right? Which would be the earlier lion that's like mean and growling and will just eat you. So these symbols tend to do this, right? And we really just we don't want to get too caught up in one interpretation of them, because then we run into something like this and we're like, wait a second, what the hell is this? This seems opposite of what we've been saying. But the symbols tend to contaminate and sort of play around with each other in these ways, especially in our dreams. These are all dream images, right? Everything that we talk about, whether they're my dreams or the alchemical statements that we're seeing, they're all dream images. There's this concept in alchemy which was called squaring the circle. So when the glowing red orb appeared to me or came to me in a dream or whatever, I wrote down, I described it as a glowing red square orb. So that's also a paradox. The shape of this thing is paradoxical. And this recalls a well-known alchemical motif that if you get into alchemy, you're going to run across it. And that is the axiom of Maria, which says this: one becomes two, two becomes three, and out of the third comes the one as the fourth. And so another way of describing this is that it's the squaring of the circle, which is sort of a modern twist on it. And also we see these different, images throughout alchemy. So for example, we have the triangle and the circle and the square. The axiom of Maria, we see play out in the series of dreams that I'm sharing. So we have Luna, the one, then becomes two when she swallows the sun, right? And then from that union comes the third, right? The newcomer in AA or Mercurius. And then what happens from there is through the interchange of this whole system, another one emerges, which is the lapis philosophorum, right? And so that one then is the fourth, right? And that becomes a symbol of the self. And the self is a unified whole, right? And so, and this is where this really starts to become very alchemical and really compensate for the church's figures of these images. So Jung says this: the axiom of Maria is concerned with the God image. The symbols of the self are, as a rule, symbols of totality, but this is only occasionally true of God images. So what Jung is alluding to here is the transition from the Trinity of Christianity, right, to a quaternity, and which includes this other unconscious element. So the God image usually starts out as a Trinity, right? And this is not only in Western civilization. Jung has examples of this in many different cultures. So, and we've talked about the transformation of the God image for many weeks now, right? That as our own ego develops, so will the God image. Like they sort of develop, they grow together. Now, what Jung's saying here then is that the God image is usually incomplete, right? We saw that in Shadow of a Figure of Light, especially in terms of the Christ image. But once there's been a certain amount of psychological growth, then what happens is, instead of a trinity emerging, we start to get this thing called a quaternity, which is there's four instead of three. And that's going to kind of take place. So that's that axiom of Maria. Now, I wanted to point out that in this sort of repeats in the 12-step fellowships with these images that we have. So Wilson introduced the circle and the triangle, right? And I find it very, very fascinating that, we celebrate this sort of this symbol as a symbol of our fellowship, right? And what we have is there's three sides to the triangle, representing unity, recovery, and service. Now, the thing to point out here is that what we have is basically a trinity, right? It's kind of an incomplete picture. It's fascinating that we forgot to name the circle, which would make perfect sense, right? Because that aspect remains in the unconscious. Now, if you're familiar with, so I was wondering about this. I was like, well, it seems like if we were to name the other circle or the other component, right, the fourth element, we would name it the self. Um, and then I looked more into this because I was curious what the Na symbol represents, and of course, uh, what do you know? Their four sides of the square, which is enclosed by a circle, represent uh, God, society, and service, which is the same as the the AA Trinity essentially. But then for the fourth element, they do add the self, which I thought was really interesting. It's sort of a completion of this system. Now, this isn't like an evaluation of whether NA is like more true than AA or anything like that. It's just very interesting to see how the psyche, even the collective psyche, will sort of play with these symbols. It's also fascinating from a perspective of depth psychology that in both systems, the circle itself wasn't named, which is the thing that encloses the whole, right? Obviously, in AA, we sort of demonize the self. I think sort of with the wrong flavor, because the self is actually the thing that leads us towards change. But all of this stuff I find to be quite fascinating. So we're talking about the self. So the lapis, again, we go back to this. The lapis is a symbol of the self. And this is what Jung says about it. The lapis is a half physical, half metaphysical product, a psychological symbol expressing something created by man and yet superordinate to him. This paradox can only be something like the symbol of the self, which likewise can be brought forth, i.e., made conscious by human effort, but is at the same time, by definition, a pre-existent totality that includes the conscious and the unconscious. So when we bring in the self, then we're sort of including the ego and everything into it, right? It's the whole psyche, the whole system kind of working together. The lapis exactly corresponds to the psychological idea of the self, the product of the conscious and the unconscious. Because the lapis is itself androgynous, a synthesis of male and female, there is no need for another coniunctio. So I feel like what I learned from these dreams is more insight into what the self is, right? The self is the conjunction of it's sort of what emerges out of the conjunction of these interior energies or these psychic energies. That, you know, we have the male and the female, we have the trickster, we have the anima, and when these components come together in the background of the psyche, what emerges is the self, which is symbolized by the lapis. I want to say something too about this image that we've seen many times of Mercurius trapped inside of the vase hermeticum, or the hermetically sealed vessel. So this obviously is another symbol of the self. This would be the self, emerging forth out of the calcinatio, right? The fire. And Jung said that Mercurius is highly elusive, right? And so the alchemist had to be really careful to keep the lid on that vessel, because Mercurius was symbolized by the vapor that would come after certain, chemical reactions or whatever. So this blue vapor would kind of emanate up to the top, and if the vessel wasn't sealed, then it would escape, and they would have to start over with all the weird and strange, instructions that they were trying to follow. So, but I think it's really interesting in terms of our own psychological development, what this symbol represents, right? I think for me, the main thing is that it means that we when we're doing this work, and this includes the 12 steps, right, is that when we close the vessel off, what it means is that we stop projecting our problems and our issues into the world, right? And we begin to take full responsibility for the state of our lives. We really try to separate ourselves from what we think the damage other people are doing. In my own personal relationships, this means that if I'm mad at Ming, for example, I really want to look at why I'm mad and why I think she's being bitchy, right? Because it's very, very possible, almost always, is what's actually happening is I'm projecting my own anima, my own bitchiness onto her. So the symbol of like sealing off this vessel is really a symbol of the work that we do, as we try to get more and more clear about the nature of the great reality. Um, so this brings us to the last dream image that I'm going to share here. Um, and this provides some pretty interesting commentary on this whole mythological motif that we've been examining. So I had this dream on December 21st, the winter solstice. And the dream is I'm holding an image, I'm holding a card, and it has an image drawn on it, much like this one. So I don't remember any of the other details of this dream, such as who drew it or where it came from. But the image lends itself to a really rich interpretation within the context of this dream sequence. And to begin with that, this statement right here from Jung really helped me to start to piece it together. So the statement reads, "The moment of the eclipse and mystic marriage is death on the cross." So that statement really struck me in terms of this dream image in the context of the other images that we've seen, the conjunction of the soul of Sol and Luna. The next important aspect of this dream, this dream image, is that it is a quaternity, right, as opposed to a trinity. So it's important to point out the Trinity, especially in terms of like Christianity, that's a hyper masculine symbol. It's three male figures that encompass this sort of club of gods, and that it's lacking this fourth element, right? And it makes sense, right? In terms of Western psychology, the introduction of the ego and this hyper rationalistic system, and the ego's like attempts to just survive in this crazy world and to really have to combat all of the dark energy and dangerous energy that's sort of bubbling up from the unconscious at all times. The ego has just really tried to dig in more and more and more and become like the thing itself. So it makes sense that there would be a God image that kind of represents this, right? This three is a symbol of the ego, right? It's a symbol of egohood. So what we have then in terms of psychological growth is at a certain point, a quaternity begins to develop. Jung said that the quaternity always represents a consciously reflected and differentiated totality and appears in dreams as an expression of the total personality. I'm going to keep reading. The total personality is indicated by the four cardinal points, the four gods, the four functions which give bearing in psychic space, and also by the circle enclosing the whole. The central point symbolizes the ultimate unity of all the archetypes, as well as of the multiplicity of the phenomenal world, and is therefore the empirical equivalent of the metaphysical concept of an unus mundus, which is, that last part is just an alchemical sort of reference. But what's taking place here then is that when these, and I have to say, like, for me, I dreamed of four skulls. I know a woman who dreamed of four eggs. And I'm going to show an example of one of Jung's patients who dreamed of four nuts, like pecans or whatever. So this is a very common kind of repetitive thing that's taking place here. And what Jung is saying is that it's sort of hinting at or pointing towards wholeness, right? The total personality. And now I'm going to get into this very briefly. Jung in the foregoing quote, he talks about the four functions as a way that the ego gets its bearings in psychic space. So the four functions were introduced by Jung in his book, Psychological Types. It's such an important book. We looked at it, throughout Shadow of a Figure of Light. This was the book Jung had published in 1921, a couple of years before he met Jaime, a couple of years before he went to Taos, and discovered his own myth. So this system is still in use today. These are the four functions of the psyche, the way Jung sort of interprets them. And what we have is intuition and sensation are running on an axis, and then we have feeling and thinking on another axis. And then within these four functions, there's also the attitude of either extroverted or introverted. Okay. actually, if you're interested, which I highly recommend, you can take a test called the Myers-Briggs, which has been adapted from this, and that will kind of tell you what your typology is. The typology I have on the screen right now is mine. Okay, so I am an extroverted, intuitive person with a more developed thinking function than feeling function, which should be obvious to you guys. And for me, sensation is very underdeveloped and sort of inferior. Um, so, uh, and this becomes important in terms of the skulls. Okay, so I want to point this out. So the way Jung has these functions working is that one of them will be highly developed. So for me, the intuition function is highly developed. And then the other two, feeling and thinking, or whatever those are on your chart, those will sort of be somewhat more developed than others. So for me, thinking is mostly conscious, some of it is unconscious. For me, feeling is probably mostly unconscious with a very small amount of it being conscious, while sensation is completely unconscious. So the reason I have a cross here is because it helps me sort of visualize what's taking place, that that inferior function will always be buried under the ground. There's no way to make it conscious. It's so, and what I find is almost laughable is in my case, the sensation. So sensation has to do with dealing in facts, the cold hard facts, which are the opposite of functioning through intuition, which is it's hilarious to me that the cold hard facts, looking at things from a very realistic perspective, the way things are now, you know, is basically an unconscious process for me. I revolt against it, and I just don't like it. Now, and this is where Jungian psychology becomes hyper sort of correlated with 12 steps, like 12-step ideology, which is that we want to do the work where it's most uncomfortable, right? That so for me, the really heavy lifting for psychological growth is going to take place in the lower part of this quadrant, in the feeling and the sensation functions, right? I don't need to practice intuition. I don't need to practice spirituality. I don't need to practice writing and stuff. That stuff, it feels so good to me. Like it's what feels the best, but it's not the actual medicine. The medicine for me is found in this other stuff that is very nebulous and difficult for me to even consider going into. So I mentioned that the skulls are a representation of the lion. So the four skulls emerge, and they're, the lion's laying on the ground. Maybe the four skulls were sort of a representation that the lion had died, right, while it's lying there on its side. But at one point, I got sort of an intuitive thought that I think that the four skulls are actually lying on the ground, and that they're staring up at Luna as a jack-o'-lantern. And when I sort of stumbled on this little insight, it really cracked open this whole concept of the types, and Jung's typology, and the work that I have to do personally, like kind of where I'm at in my journey. So I mentioned that the skulls appeared to me during the winter solstice. That's the day in the north where the sun is the sun's at the furthest point south, right? So for those of us in the northern hemisphere, it's the darkest day of the year. It's also the sun. The sun is at the most southern point, and so when the skulls emerge on the solstice, that's a highly significant symbol because it means that the skulls are facing southwest. And this detail about the southwest is important for two reasons. The first one is this: in Shadow of Figure Light, I explore the idea of the Southwest quite a lot. That Jung traveled to the American Southwest. That's where he discovered his own myth. That's where he learned about alcoholism. If Jung hadn't gone to the Southwest, we don't know what his message would have been to Roland. So the Southwest is sort of this symbol for me of discovering one's own sort of shaman kind of archetype, right? Where it's where Jung met the trickster, and where where perhaps he turned into a shaman or something like that. When it comes to my own psychology, though, the Southwest is really, really important in terms of this typology, right? Because the Southwest correlates to my own psychology, which is this is how it correlates, right? And this sort of helped me piece this together. This statement from Edinger. He says West very often refers to sensation. So feeling and sensation would be the inferior functions of this type, this thinking intuitive type, and that would correspond to the South and the West. And so for me then, it's very significant that the skulls are facing the Southwest, towards this feeling and this sensation, and that the moon is there too, in that part of the sky. So, and this, so, and I want to point this out too. So Jung presents this dream in Psychology and Alchemy. And this is the one that I was referring to earlier. He said that his patient sees in a dream a silver bowl with 4 cracked nuts at the cardinal points. And so very similar to my dream of the 4 skulls, right? This is what Jung says about this dream. He says that the dreamer has an inadequate understanding of the polarity is shown by the fact that the nuts have still to be cracked in reality, and also that they are all alike. In other words, not yet differentiated. And so if I'm to look at this image of the 4 skulls from a fairly objective perspective, like as much objectivity as I can muster, then the message here to me is pretty clear. It's that I still have a lot of work to do when it comes to this feeling and this sensation function, right? These things relate to where I'm at in my own kind of life with our company. Sensation has a lot to do with finances because it's dealing in reality. I take huge risks when it comes to finances. That's also part of being an intuitive type. The feeling function for me is how I relate to people, how I relate to situations. It has a lot to do with my reluctance to, dress nice and try to fit in and try to put on a good face. There's just, so it's fascinating to me that the psyche, if we let it give us these messages and if we let it sort of, come through, Jung calls it the objective psyche. That's because it's giving us the objective feedback, and it's our job to try to parse through that and figure out where it is that we still need to grow. And this is stuff that I perhaps could learn with a therapist and perhaps could have uncovered with a sponsor. But I have to tell you that these are such subtle sort of reactions and things in my life that I don't know that I would have got to this much insight without help from my dreams. And it's just, there's so much work to do still. It's hard to even get into it. So lying on the ground, then the 4 skulls are gazing up at Luna, who's been changed into a pumpkin and is emitting a warm red glow. When I wrote the poem God's Folly, I had depicted Luna as a mirror through which Sophia was witnessing the suffering of her children. So the moon, Jung says that the moon is a poisonous mirror. And that sort of came through in God's Folly as well. This means that the skulls are lying there staring up at a mirror. And so what they're looking at is the central point of that cross. The skull is an important alchemical symbol because the skull holds the brain, and the brain is, so the skull is the seat of understanding, and the brain is related to the moon. So if you dream about the brain, it's kind of it's an equivalent of a symbol of the moon. The skull is also a symbol of the vas hermeticum, right? That hermetically sealed vessel, where the real opus takes place. So with that in mind, then this graph was presented by Edinger in his book Mysterium Lectures, and it's about the axiom of Maria, right? 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the 1 as the fourth. And so Edinger gave us these shapes, and I want to I'm going to implement my own words to describe what these shapes are, just to, and this is where I got with these images. For the one is Luna as the jack-o'-lantern, right? And then from there we transition into the bed and the glowing red orb, which is symbolized by this picture right here. And oh, we also have, sorry, the skulls. The skulls are looking at the moon as the jack-o'-lantern, but the skulls also they're looking into a mirror, right? So what they're seeing then is they're sort of looking at that red cross. And so this helps me kind of get a visual of what's taking place, right? That the real work is taking place inside the psyche, inside the vase. So and what happens here then is that the circle sort of is completed, right? We have the, Jung says that the circle is the thing that is the symbol of wholeness, right? The square is not necessarily a whole symbol. It's got these rough edges around it, but that the circle is the thing itself, and the skull would be a symbol of that circle. Now, okay, so enough of that. The last few slides here, I've got about 10 minutes. And I wanted to give you guys that image that we just saw of the skulls. They're looking at this sort of strange lunar event, right? They're seeing the pumpkin. They're seeing Luna as a jack-o'-lantern. The sun is inside of Luna. And this is a huge kind of repetitive motif that I want to show this from a few different sort of cultural contexts. To give it a psychological flavor, though, Edinger tells us pretty clearly what's taking place. The ego is eclipsed and the autonomous archetypal process has taken over. And so what we've already seen a few examples of this. One of them is with this image right here with the statement from Revelation that the woman is standing on the moon, with 12 stars around her head, and she's eclipsing the sun. The other New Testament references to this same mythological motif would be, first of all, the incarnation, right? That when Mary is overshadowed by the Holy Ghost. And then the second one is in John chapter 3, when Nicodemus is talking to Jesus, and Jesus says, if a man wants to enter into the kingdom of heaven, he must be born again. And Nicodemus, he asks this really profound question. He says, does that mean that a person should crawl back into his mother's womb? And Jesus basically says, well, you're supposed to understand this. You're a teacher, among the Jewish people, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, though, Nicodemus is asking a really interesting and poignant question there when we look at this myth from an alchemical perspective, right? Because the truth is, yes, psychologically speaking, symbolically speaking, a person does need to enter back into the womb in order to bring this process to fruit. This statement comes from Jung's Mysterium, or Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So in 1944, Carl Jung, he was actually in the middle of writing Mysterium Coniunctionis, and he broke his foot and had a heart attack, and he ended up in the hospital. And he had a near-death experience. The nurse that was working on him thought that he was dead, just because from her experience, it appeared that he was already dead, and he did have an experience where he was invited to come back into his body and stuff like that. Over the next few weeks while he was in the hospital, he was still recovering, and he was very exhausted and tired, and he would sort of like wake up for a little while, and then he would fall back to sleep. And when we would fall back to sleep, he would sort of enter into these great, like, grand mythological spaces, right? And that's what I'm reading from here. So Jung is describing those times. He says, during those weeks, I lived in a strange rhythm. At night, it was as if I were in an ecstasy. I felt as though I were floating in space, as though I were safe in the womb of the universe, in a tremendous void, but filled with the highest possible feeling of happiness. This is eternal bliss, I thought. This cannot be described. It is far too wonderful. Everything around me seemed enchanted. At this hour of the night, the nurse brought me some food, and she had warmed, for only then was I able to take any, and I ate with appetite. For a time, it seemed to me that she was an old Jewish woman, much older than she actually was, and that she was preparing ritual kosher dishes for me. When I looked at her, she seemed to have a blue halo around her head. I myself was, so it seemed, in the Pardes Ramonium. the garden of pomegranates at the wedding of Tiferet and Malkuth was taking place. Or else I was Rabbi Simon ben Jakkai, whose wedding in the afterlife was being celebrated. It was the mystic marriage as it appears in the Kabbalistic tradition. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was. I could only think continually, now this is the garden of pomegranates. Now this is the marriage of Malkuth and Tiferet. I do not know exactly what part I played in it. At bottom, I was myself. I was the marriage, and my beatitude was that of a blissful wedding. Gradually, the garden of pomegranates faded away and changed. There followed the marriage of the Lamb in a Jerusalem festively bedecked. I cannot describe what it was like in detail. So the marriage of the Lamb is in Revelation when Jesus comes back, and the Lamb is representative of the church, right? So the motif is repeated. That too vanished, and then came the new image, came a new image, the last vision. I walked up a wide valley to the end, where a gentle chain of hills began. The valley ended in a classic amphitheater. It was magnificently situated in the green landscape. And there, in this theater, the Hieros Gamos, again, the royal marriage, was being celebrated. Men and women dancers came on stage, and upon a flower-decked couch, All-Father Zeus and Hera consummated the mystic marriage, as it is described in the Iliad. All these experiences were glorious. Night after night, I floated in a state of purest bliss, thronged round with images of all creation. Gradually, the motifs mingled and paled. Usually, the visions lasted for about an hour. Then I would fall asleep again. By the time morning drew near, I would feel, now gray morning is coming again. Now comes the gray world with all its boxes. What idiocy, what hideous nonsense. Those inner states were so fantastically beautiful that they, by comparison, this world appeared downright ridiculous. As I approached closer to life again, they grew fainter, and scarcely 3 weeks after the first vision, they ceased altogether. Now, before his illness in 1944, Jung had written a letter to someone, and he said that before this happened to him, he had often wondered whether he was permitted to share his secret knowledge. And then he had these experiences, and then he decided that, yes, he needed to share absolutely as much as he could with the world. And the first kind of effort in that regard was his book, Mysterium Coniunctionis. But he also says that he really undertook this task when he wrote the book Ion, which is a shorter book of his. And it's all about sort of the role of Christ and Christ as an image of the self. And it's just really packed full of like really profound stuff. So this, what I want to jump to now is, so Jung, again, I want to recall that we're sort of imagining what it is that these four skulls are looking at as they look into the sky, the moon as the jack-o'-lantern that's been penetrated by the sun, right? So it's this mystic marriage. So this is the section from the Iliad that Jung referred to, and I want to read this because I just find it absolutely beautiful. Here, so Zeus is now leading Hera into the secret bower, right? And that amphitheater of which Jung spoke. So, and Zeus is speaking, and he says, "Nor God, nor mortal shall our joys behold, shaded with clouds and circumfused in gold, not even the sun who darts through heaven his rays, and whose broad eye the extended earth surveys. Gazing, he spoke, and kindling at the view, his eager arms around the goddess threw. Glad earth perceives, and from her bosom pours unbidden herbs and voluntary flowers. Thick newborn violets a soft carpet spread, and clustering lotus swelled the rising bed. And sudden hyacinths the turf bestrow, and flamy crocus made the mountains glow. There golden clouds conceal the heavenly pair, steeped in soft joys and circumfused with air. Celestial dews descending over the ground, perfume the mount and breathe ambrosia round. At length, with love and sleep soft power oppressed, the panting thunderer nods and sinks to rest." And so here again, we have this amazing description of the process of making the darkness conscious, and sort of the love affair that entails, right? I have this next few slides comes from a text called Ripley's Cantina. Jung quotes this in full in Mysterium Coniunctionis. And this was an alchemist description of the text that we just, or not the text, but of the scene, I guess, that we just read. So this is how it goes. With all delicious unguent flowed she when purged from bloody monstrosity. On every side her countenance brightly shone, she being adorned with every precious stone. A lion green did in her lap reside, the which an eagle fed, and from his side the blood gushed out. The virgin drunk it up, while Mercurius' hand did the office of a cup. The wondrous milk she hastened from her breast, bestowed it frankly on the hungry beast, and with a sponge his furry face she dried, which her own milk had often maidified. Upon her head a diadem she did wear, with fiery feet she advanced into the air, and glittering bravely in her golden robes, she took her place amidst the starry globes. The dark clouds being dispersed, so sate she there, and woven to a network in her hair were planets, time, signs, and while the king, with his glad eyes, was her beleaguering. Thus, from a square, the bed a globe is made, and purest whiteness from the blackest shade. While from the bed the ruddy sun doth spring to grasp the joyful spectre of a king. Hence God unlocked the gates of paradise, raised him Luna to the imperial palace, sublimed her to the heavens, and that being done, crowned him in glory equal with the sun. 4 elements, brave arms, and polished well, God gave him in the midst whereof did dwell the crowned maid, ordained for to be in the 5th circle of the mystery. So I really like this too, because now this is the image of, and I invite you guys to read back over these and try to really, digest them. But it's the image of the unconscious sort of entering into the realm of the king, right? So the king is being given the gift of the unconscious, right? And it's this really a very interesting image because what's happening is the queen is giving the lion. So the lion is the child. It's also the bridegroom, and it's giving the queen is giving milk from her breast to the lion, who's also bleeding, and the queen is drinking the blood of the lion that Mercurius is offering to her in a cup. Meanwhile, there's an eagle feeding on the side of the lion. So it's this really strange dream image, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if people have had dreams that are very similar to this, just this really awkward and almost awful imagery, right? But once we learn how to see this through our symbolical glasses, then it starts to make more sense. So step 11, we sought to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. I do want to propose that step 11 is yet another repetition of this same mythological motif, in as much as the ego is the consciousness and it's seeking to make contact with the unconscious, that feminine aspect, right? The unconscious is feminine. Wrapping up, this is the last slide, and because when I look at all these kind of really weird symbols, and I try to make meaning, and I try to present meaning, and try to talk to my friends about this stuff, and the question is, what does it all mean, right? Like, am I just doing more of that thing where I, like to float off into the clouds with my thinking and my intuition functions, and ignore the parts of my life that would be better off, had I paid more attention to them? And those are all very valid questions, right? But this is the thing is regardless of how much work there is yet to do, when we make an honest attempt to live the symbolic life, then what I've found that happens for me is that these symbols are reflective of this change that's taking place in the background of my psyche. And the only evidence I have that change is taking place is in the way that I interact with the world and what the world presents me. And so I often ask Ming, like, does this mean anything, and she honestly, she reassures me quite often that it does. Like there's really profound changes taking place in my life that I may not even be super aware of, but that are really apparent to her. And that's very meaningful, right? And so the proof is in the pudding. I wanted to end with this quote because I think it really gets at sort of the way we approach these symbols and how we're supposed to relate to them, right? And I really like what Jung says here. He says, one should not be put off by the physical impossibilities of dogma or of the coniunctio, for they are symbols in regard to which the allurements of rationalism are entirely out of place and miss the mark. If symbols mean anything at all, they are tendencies which pursue a definite but not yet recognizable goal, and consequently can express themselves only in analogies. In this uncertain situation, one must be content to leave things as they are and give up trying to know anything beyond the symbol. And the way I interpret this is to basically say that as we sort of try to gather these symbols around us and try to discover which symbols are living inside of us and which ones are being presented to us from the outside, and how all of these different personifications and sort of personalities interact with each other, that we don't need to be too concerned with meaning. That the meaning is meant to come later, and that what the symbols are telling us is that there are changes occurring, right? And we can be certain that as the symbols change, so is our conscious reaction. And so as these symbols move and relate and have love affairs and murder one another, and our ego gets entangled, and just all this sort of this divine drama that's taking place in the world of symbols, as those symbols grow and change and morph and interact, we are also changing in real life. And it's an amazing experience, and that is, that's what I want to leave you guys with. So I will end it now, and I'll turn it back over to our friend Duncan.
Well, friends, I invite you all to unmute and make some expressions of appreciation, horror,
Thanks, Cody.
confusion,
Thank you. Thanks, Cody.
bewilderment.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Cody. Thank you, Ming.
Uh,
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you,
light,
guys.
Thank you, Cody.
Thank you, Ming.
Right.
Thank you, Duncan.
I,
Everybody.
I'm gonna have. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna have to dismiss myself now because I just can't take it anymore. I've been the host of this show for weeks and weeks. I'm so lost. I must disqualify myself from continuing. Oh, we're not meeting anymore? Perfect timing. Okay, folks, we're going to go to question and answers. I see some hands coming up already. If you don't want to be recorded, you can put your question in the chat and I will weave that into the Q&A. Please, when I call on you, ask you to unmute, what have you, please get quickly to your question within 90 seconds or so that we can hear more from Cody and Pooja, please. Oh, sorry. Here you go, Pooja. Come on in.
Hey, Robert.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Duncan, and thanks so much, Cody and Ming. So the entire team, Cody, I must start by saying that ever since I first attended the session in the beginning of the month, I've had some really intense stuff. Just to put it very briefly, I did discuss with the BFF chat GPT. And so there was stuff like an attack by a rope of lizards that meant a lot to me because it just scared the death out of me. in the dream. And that's what the app said, that's exactly what it signifies. It's something you're very fearful about. And since then, I've also processed a lot of, and those lizards have been quite repetitive. And then the process of processing grief. So seeing my teenage daughter come towards me, and then as soon as I hug her, she just falls limp in my arms, and I'm just letting out a scream, and I wake up with the face contorted in a scream. Again, a lot of grief. I am 31, so I'm not even married. So that was really bizarre. Then repetitively seeing some sort of marital theme, and putting that in jeopardy, it signified some sort of union with the self, the true self. Sometimes just being audience to an impending marriage of a friend or something, and sometimes preparing for my own with the consciousness that I am preparing for my own. So it's just so intense. And I think the last slide of your session is what makes most sense to me, that I do not have to know, but the fact that there are so many symbols coming, it suggests that there is change happening within. And yeah, so by any chance, do you have any thoughts on any of these apart from, the regular discussion that I'm having with Mr. ChatGPT? I would love to hear.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for sharing. I mean, I think that so the dream of getting eaten by lizards, I think, is a really quite common dream. A really person very, very close to me had a dream that she was subdued and a snake had come and bit her on the hands and the feet. And I actually had an experience where a snake tried to bite me, which was almost felt dreamlike when it happened. And I think that these kinds of dreams are indicative of sort of a deeper layer of our unconscious trying to get our attention. The snake, the dragon, the lizard, those are all references to a very, very deep strata of the psyche. Sort of a very kind of animalistic part of us, like a snake is almost like it's like just pure, like just the central nervous system, just purely animalistic. And so when a snake is kind of appearing and trying to get, to bite us or scare us or whatever, that it's that there's I would suggest that this would say that there's work to do. There's a lot of interior looking that needs to happen. You mentioned your age, and I think that it's pretty significant typically in terms of interpreting dreams, because Jung talked about life sort of being divided into 3 stages. We have the beginning, the middle, and the end. And what happens in the middle is we typically have a midlife crisis, right? That's where the ego really comes up against the psyche and finds that absolutely must, it's got to give the psyche space. It's got to take the 3rd step or whatever that is. So I think that as you move towards that midlife, that it's important to recognize that there's things to learn, that life's not always easy. Jung, Ming read this the other day, like life begins at 40. That was something that Jung supposedly said. And the reason is because that's after that midlife, right? And so that we finally have enough ego strength, we've gone through the midlife crisis, and we've begin to find meaning in life. So I would keep that in mind. And I think that the dreams are always very telling. And I love that you're using chat, and I just I would just keep doing that and try to read some stuff from some Jungians too about these things. And yeah, thanks for sharing. I appreciate it, Pooja.
Thank you, Pooja. James Matheson.
Duncan, thank you. I'd just like to say to our bus driver, to Ming, Friendly Circle Berlin, Cody, most importantly, to yourself, this past few months and this past few weeks, I have changed completely. I will never be the person that I was before I started reading your book. I can never go back on that path. Thank you for that. I was saying to Ming, I was really interested in the points that you made tonight on intuition and sensation, and I would really like to explore more of this. And so Ming has pointed me to psychological types and lectures on Jung's typology as ways of maybe exploring those two areas further. Gnosticism and Christianity, and the symbols that you were speaking of in this discussion tonight. Did early Christians, as they oppressed Gnostic beliefs, just steal all their symbols and just refigure them for themselves? I guess there must be like a sect within whatever belief systems we're developing at the same time. I'm going to get lost in my own question here. I've not thought it through as well as I imagined I have. It's just I just get the idea that Gnosticism, did Christianity just steal everything, every Gnostic belief, and just bastardize it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. I think that there's another book I would recommend. It's written by Edward Edinger. It's called Gnosticism and Early Christianity. And what Edinger does is he goes through and compares about 12 different figureheads from those centuries, and some of them became church fathers: St. Augustine, Saint Clementine, Valentinius, Simon Magus, Manny, and what it appears to me is that the church fathers themselves, I don't think it would be fair to accuse them of sort of bastardizing and then sort of reformulating for their own power gains and stuff. That doesn't, I don't seem to get that kind of vibe from what Edinger has to say. What they were up against was that this growing sense of ego consciousness, right? And so it was almost this unconscious process that was taking place, that they sort of had an unconscious tendency towards this kind of hyper rational masculine system as a reflection of what was kind of taking place, like in the collective psyche, that was finally kind of crawling out of the darkness of ancient times, right? Like in terms of participation mystique is sort of evaporating. And what's taking place is that the ego is kind of asserting itself as this more sort of dominant character, which is necessary in terms of psychological expansion and psychological growth. So what we can see is, like, in terms of what happens to us individually, that's also probably what took place collectively. And so as we can kind of look at the evolution of our own God concept, it's probably something more similar to that, versus like an attempt for power. That's not to say that later on, or even in the moment, that there weren't those types of things taking place. There's always a power element, right, in the human kind of interaction. But it seems to me that the people who were formulating the dogma, they didn't know what they were doing. They thought they were doing good, whereas and what they did was necessary in terms of rational, ego growth, and but also it ends up in that enantiodromia that we talked about, you know, it ends up swinging the other direction and becomes problematic. So yeah, Gnosticism and early Christianity. It's a short little book. It's a great read. And thanks for saying what you said, James. I really, that it's very meaningful to hear people's experience, that they're seeing the world differently. Like, it's an honor to take place and take part in that process for you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Cody. A question from the chat. When you were talking about the personality functions vis-a-vis the cross, you were referring to function stacks, extroverted, intuition, etc. Is it Jung's stance that in couple relationships, opposite functions help to round each other out by filling what the other lacks? For example, would a person with extroverted intuition do well with a partner with introverted intuition?
That is a good question, and I think it's valid. And I think that I don't think Jung would say that they necessarily round each other out, because what is more sort of likely, I think, is that these functions. So what happens is, like, if I'm an intuitive, an extroverted intuitive, then I just might fall in love with a person who's more of a feeling type, right? So those are sort of the kind of the opposites. And what happens is that other person may make us feel as if we're complete, right? And for a while, there's sort of like a dance and everything just fits perfect, right? Until later on, when the inferior functions start to interact with each other, and that feeling of completeness vanishes, right? But this forces you to look at the inferior functions. So, and this is the thing about culture and society and schooling, is that we tend to, so for example, the Myers-Briggs is a perfect example of this. People take the Myers-Briggs to figure out what their main function is, and then they pursue that in a career. And so what happens is it solidifies more and more the main function and weakens the inferior function, to where the inferior function essentially dies off. The problem is that, so, and I didn't mention this, but if we have the cross and it's stuck in the ground, you know, that the main functions are up here and they're functioning great. That inferior function is the part that keeps us grounded. So we want to, the real work that takes place in the second half of life is to figure out what the inferior function is and what it looks like, and then how we can begin to assimilate it, and like, and what does it mean, right? So, you know, what does it mean for me to exercise feeling as a function, and to try to bring up proper emotions at proper times or whatever. So I think that I don't think that it's necessarily a completion. It feels like a completion, but it's actually, that completion ends up being an illusion. So what Jung would often do is he would find people of the same functions, and then he would put them together. So if a person came to him to be treated that was the opposite of him, in order to sort of combat this, he would actually put that person with somebody of the same function. So then the therapist and the patient would sort of, they would kind of see each other for what they really were, and that would help to sort of break down these walls and stuff. So he would take the opposite tack. So,
Wow. Fiona, come on in.
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's just been such an exciting journey, this over the weeks. It's been like amazing. Just a couple of things I was going to say, you know, as regards to the symbols, the dream symbols, and quite a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was in therapy, and I had this like numinous dream of where I walked up some rocks and went into a cave, a temple, and a priestess was at the entrance to meet me. And they were chanting. There was some kind of ritual going on, and there was a grasshopper that became like a lantern. It became like a light, you know. And anyway, that's just one dream image. And funny, rather synchronistically, to me, that's a really like important dream I'm still trying to understand. Like you were saying about Jung, just living with the image. So if you have any thoughts on that. But I looked it up, and apparently it's in China, they have a myth of the grasshopper being eternal life. It's a symbol of eternal life. So, you know, I looked it up as a dream image. And I know like people have done, I don't know, like praying mantis, or there's these insects, and they've had other. So I thought that was funny. Anyway, and the other one synchronistically was, I just was looking at my dream journal from last year, and then I stopped writing dreams. I started doing it again, and there's a lion and a dog involved, and it was 22nd of April today. I mean, like, you know, what's the chances of that? Maybe I'll quickly read it. I'll say, they're 22nd of April, Monday it was. There's a lion on the street and a cub, and they are facing away from me, a lioness and cub. The cub comes away and has a half-eaten dog in its mouth. The mother lion is restless and yowling. I warn someone who has a dog. The dog doesn't want to be rescued. It resists. But I insist. And I give the dog to the owner, who realizes the emergency. And then the owner puts the dog behind some glass, and then they're in a cafe. Anyway, if you have it, I just thought, I was like, amazing. It was the same day. So do you have
Yeah,
any thoughts on any
sure.
of that? Those two dream images?
Yeah, first of all, the thing with the dates is interesting because I noticed too, like a repetition for me is like around November, October, November, a lot of these big kind of these big symbols always emerge around the same time of the year. Which who knows, maybe that has to do with astrology and whatnot. But so I think your dream is really interesting. From like a female perspective, you know, I guess the lion is sort of a representation of maybe the dominant perspective. So I don't know, because I'm not a woman, and unfortunately I haven't studied this stuff yet. But so the dominant perspective then is eating the dog, which who knows if the dog is a representation like the opposite of the lion. You know, and whether from a female perspective, the lion is a representation of the unconscious or of the sun. So, you know, these are all really important things to try to figure out for yourself, is because the way I would relate to these from a masculine perspective is different than the way the female psyche would relate. So I would find some stuff by Marie Louise von Franz, and because I think she has a book about feminine psychology, or female psychology, so that might be helpful. But I think the image of the self is important there. Who is the owner, right? And how the owner protects the dog. Whether the dog is the unconscious or the conscious, I don't know. I couldn't interpret that for you, but I think it's highly symbolic. It's very similar to the dream I had about the lion and the dog too.
Yeah,
So
amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
Wesley, asking you to unmute.
Yes. Thank you so much, Duncan, for your service. Thank you so much also, Cody, for your presentation. So far I've really gained a lot from your talk in the meeting. I've gained a lot of clarity. So there's this dream that I had last week. and I dreamed that I was in a public vehicle with other people, and then all of a sudden we had an accident. But from that accident, like the dream was very, very vivid to the point that I was feeling as if it was true, because my head kept on spinning when the accident was occurring. And then we were so many in that vehicle, and then only 3 of us came out alive, and I was among them. So I was wondering what this dream is all about. Thank you so much.
Sure. So the dream has a lot of alchemical symbolism. The vehicle would be a representation of the vas hermeticum, or the hermetically sealed vessel. Jung said that vehicles are really important in dreams because they tell us sort of like what's kind of dominating, what the container is. So whether it's like a rented car, or like it could be a rocket ship or an airplane. I dream of this van very often, which has a lot of significance for me. But what takes place, so I also dream about crashes in the vehicles a lot. And what I say, what I see in those is that that it's what takes place in the container for the alchemist, right? So the symbol is that there's this shaking, and also the spinning. So the if your head is spinning around like that, so that's the circumambulatio. I think it's, or circumlatio or something. But it's that is that as the thing goes around and around in a circle, then what ends up being created is a center point, right? Which is the self. So as we circumscribe an area, right, around and around and around, eventually what emerges is the center. And so I think that is what is probably happening in the dream, that that's the symbolism that's taking place. So, but you know, it's interesting to look at the other people in the dream, who they are, what they represent. You know, were they men? Were they women? Who was killed? Who survived? If you can remember that stuff. All of this stuff has meaning and context. So, and you know, definitely some alchemical images taking place. So I want to recommend Edinger's book, the Anatomy of the Psyche. He talks about all these alchemical procedures and how they relate to the dream world. And once I read that book, a lot of stuff started making a lot of sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Despina.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Cody. Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been really so illuminating. I can never remember my dreams. I don't see symbols in them, but a lot of them are around my sister. I had one full-blooded sister who committed suicide 35 years ago. She and I had a very complex relationship because when she was born, she kind of took my father's attention completely. And then years later, she hooked up with someone that I was very much in love with. And they were together for 7 years. Throughout that time, I dreamt that I was chasing them. Night after night, I had these dreams that I was chasing them and they were running from me. So there weren't, I mean, I don't know how to read the symbols. Yet then after she died, for 30 years, she was never in my dreams. But suddenly when my younger son left the state and moved back east, she was in my dreams every night, there interacting with me and very much in my life in a way that she hadn't been for 30 years in my dreams. And so I've felt that there was an attempt to build this relationship because our relationship was so broken from what had happened when she was alive. So there aren't any symbols, but this relationship building after my son left. I mean, she was in my dreams every night. And I don't usually remember my dreams, but I was so shocked that after 30 years, she was suddenly back in my subconscious. And I also wanted to get some pointers on how to remember dreams. I mean, it's only really profound dreams I remember. So that was a lot.
No, it's
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I mean, there's clearly a correlation between your sister and your son and them kind of leaving, you know, and maybe like a sense of abandonment or you know, sort of being let down, sort of betrayed possibly, except you have to figure that out. Cause I mean, I wouldn't ever want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, tell you that it means one thing, but you know, and I think that, you know, this stuff is really worth looking at. I mean, even though they don't seem symbolic, you know, I think your sister would certainly carry symbolic meaning for you. You know, whether that's some symbolism from your childhood or just, you know, a symbol of a longing for connection, the coniunctio, wholeness, you know, certainly chasing your sister, with her lover, that's they're very symbolic there of like, you know, a longing for that paradoxical conjunction, you know, of opposites. So you could look at it that way. You know, I don't know, there may be some hints here about some work to do with grieving and, you know, everything else. I mean, obviously that's stuff that you need to figure out on your own. So, and I think the dreams can be pretty helpful in figuring out what the actions are that we should be pursuing and to remember the dreams. I have a hard time remembering my dreams too. And what I do is I have my phone next to my bed and I have the note app open. I turn the lights down on it so it doesn't blind me. And I kind of do that before I go to sleep. And then, you know, about half the time, probably I remember to write down the images, and I just write down what I can remember. By the time I get the phone in my hand and I start typing, and it's really hard, it's like, oh, what happened? What was the order of events? And like, but I just go ahead and write down whatever I can. And then in the morning, I'll try to look at it and sort of maybe edit it just a little to try to piece together what it was. And maybe I'll remember more details. And then, you know, I mean, a few years ago, I didn't hardly remember any dreams at all. Ming reminded me, I actually read somewhere online that if you take a certain vitamin, if you like overdose on this vitamin, then it's supposed to help you remember your dreams. So of course I bought a bottle of it and ate like 10.
Which vitamin?
I don't know, but it's supposed to not be good for you. But anyways, it's yeah, it's like IUE or something, 5,000 or something weird. But I don't know. So I tried that, you know, but what happens is it's like a muscle. You kind of develop it, you know. You get more used to it. And you kind of learn what to look for and what to write down and what images there are and how they're important. And then you just have to really practice at trying to interpret what it means, you know. So even though it doesn't look symbolic on the surface, the ego will always say that, you know, like, oh, this doesn't mean anything, but it probably does. So.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question in the chat. It's the last one I see here. Does not dreaming on the whole mean something about the person? Maybe they're not in touch with the subconscious.
Interesting.
So I missed the first part of that.
Does not dreaming on the whole mean something about the person? Maybe they're not in touch with the subconscious.
So I don't quite understand the context. I think that I would actually, though, if I understand correctly, what is being said is that dreaming itself means that a person isn't in touch with the subconscious. Is that if that's what I'm hearing?
I think it's that what if a person doesn't dream? Does it mean that they're not? I thought does not dreaming on the whole mean something about the person? Maybe they're not in touch with the unconscious.
Yeah. So I think I think possibly yes. I mean, but I don't know about that. I mean, so like for me, I didn't dream for a long time, and I actually for years I would read about dreams and hear the Jungians talk about it. I was like, oh, that's too bad I don't dream. That's not for me. And but so to say that I wasn't connected to the unconscious during those times, I don't know that that would be absolutely an accurate statement. I think whether we like it or not, we're connected to the unconscious. And I think that we can each sort of engage with the unconscious in different ways. For me, though, I do want to say that once I started giving place to these symbols and to really try to figure out what they mean and see the world through a symbolic lens, that it feels like my engagement with the unconscious changed, and that it became more sort of immediate and more fruitful. But like we saw in Shadow of a Figure of Light, which is really an engagement with the unconscious, you know, that doesn't have to do a lot with symbols. We still engage with the unconscious through our complexes. So, you know, that's also just something to consider. So we're all just sort of along the path somewhere. You know, the question is how, like, for example, like if I take a third step prayer, then I think I'm engaging with the unconscious. I think that I'm just calling the unconscious something else. You know, I might be calling it God or higher power or whatever. So I think the whole process and the steps is an engagement with the unconscious too. So I think it's just different methods that we use. So, but I think that's a pretty insightful question. So thanks for asking and pointing it out.
Thanks. Anne Connolly.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cody. So enjoying this. Just want to go back to participation mystique you mentioned, and I did put it into the chat. This, you know, I kind of feel we've lost something by not being able to connect with that anymore. Like I know Jung talked about the primitive, and now that's actually been seen kind of as a racist word. We've kind of denigrated the primitive. But when we came into this conscious, egoic, I suppose Descartes, I think, therefore I am, we lost this connection to the natural world. And I just wanted to ask you too, if you'd come across the Sharon Blackie and the idea of the post-heroic journey. If Women Rose Rooted is her publication, and very much about what we've lost is this connection to the earth, the planet, exactly what that participation mystique was, us, and we're all one kind of thing. Just wondered if you could reflect on that. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not familiar with the name that you gave, but I am somewhat familiar with the book, The Women Who Run with Wolves. I think that's what you had mentioned. Yeah, so I'm fascinated by this subject, and participation mystique is such an interesting idea, right? It's so I think if anytime we project, you know, like if I project my anima onto Ming, I'm actually engaging in participation mystique to a certain extent, because you know, there's this unconscious identification with the things in the world, right? So it was that unconscious identification with the chemicals and the alchemical process that allowed so much of the psychological process to sort of be revealed through the alchemical writings, right? Like if they would have been slightly kind of separated from that participation mystique, then they wouldn't have really projected so much into it. You know, it's interesting because we did grow out of participation mystique, and I actually agree that the goal is to sort of try to get back to that. But I think it's to try to get back to that in a more kind of conscious way, and to kind of recognize that that's what we're experiencing. You know, I read this thing from von Franz just the other day that, you know, when we talk about the psychological types, intuition, sensation, feeling, and thinking, that for an ancient human who is living off the land, maybe a hunter-gatherer, farmers too, like who are actually farming and really had to be one with the earth. So they would have naturally had to exercise all of their functions almost in an equal way. So so they were connected, and they were also connected to the psyche, which is nature, right? Like the psychic process is natural. The dreams come from nature. So and then what happens is with the emergence of civilization uh and we become more kind of dedicated, the word escapes me right now, but what culture does and what society does is it sort of like funnels us into those things that we're good at. So we tend to kind of overdevelop in certain aspects, right? And the other aspects kind of get left by the wayside. So the process is that we get back to trying to use all four functions, right? And you know, that the goal is in the end is to sort of be able to sit in the middle, and to use the functions like at will, you know. So and so rather than being haunted by our inferior function, we sort of like move towards it more and allow it to become a tool. And so each of the four functions becomes a tool that we can use at will. And that would be enlightenment in sort of the Jungian phrase. So yeah, you know, very, very fascinating.
Thank you. Gail.
Hi, Cody. Thanks so much. Another amazing session. I remembered a couple of dreams when you mentioned the brain earlier. I used to have a recurrent dream as a child. And this dream was quite short, but in the dream I would visualize my own brain inside my head. And then with my thoughts, I would smooth out all the ridges of my brain until it was pure and smooth. There was a sense that it was a purification process. And then I also remembered another one that I had where it was like a dismemberment, where my flesh was eaten off my bones by birds, and then Cernunnos, the Celtic horned god, laid me on an altar, cut open my skull, and he removed my brain and had it washed down in the river. He also disemboweled me and cleansed my womb, and then I was put into the river and completely renewed. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about the brain cleansing, the renewal aspect.
Yeah, again, these are, you know, I love the symbols here. So there's the mortificatio, right? The death, there's the separation, the dismemberment. There's the sublimatio, which is it's the solutio is going into the water, which is typically it can be a cleansing process. It can also be a dangerous process. It really depends on who, you know, who we are, right? So these are great dreams. It's so, you know, the thing about them is like, I think that like, when it comes to these symbols, even though, I mean, I have these dreams a lot and I don't know exactly what they mean. Some of them are just way too deep. And the images are they're just too much, you know, and I can, so the dreams I've kind of presented, they were really important dreams, and I really dedicated like a good amount of time to study them and figure out what I think they mean. So with any one of these dreams, we can do that same thing, right? And where I would start would be with these alchemical processes, right? Is like, okay, what does this mean? Who also the Myers-Briggs, right? What is my psychological type, right? As an intuitive thinker, I'm always up in the air. And so I want to basically try to recognize that most likely the psyche will either be commenting on the fact that I'm floating away too much, or it'll be trying to compensate for that, right? And I can learn a lot from where I'm at each day and what my my daily process is based on how I'm relating to those symbols alchemically. So, and it's a really fascinating journey. So yeah, thanks for, I mean, I love all this, all these dreams. They're really good. I actually kind of log them and remember them and think about them as
Yeah.
as I'm studying. So what's Ming saying here? The
Thank
Myers-Briggs
you.
doesn't perfectly align with Jung, though. A good beginning. Yeah. Yeah, the Myers-Briggs, it's so Jung has 8 quadrants because we have the 4, we have thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. And then with each of those, there's either extroverted or introverted. So there's 8. I think what Myers-Briggs did was added another 2 to make it 16. So there's 16 in the Myers-Briggs where there's only 8 in the Jungian. However, I think the Myers-Briggs will tell you pretty accurately what your dominant function is and whether you're introverted or extroverted. And then from there, you can sort of deduce the other half of the function of the equation. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Cody. Thanks, everybody. We're at the 2-hour mark now, and I would propose that we prepare for departure. So if you'll please take your seats and buckle your seatbelts. Cody, what else? What else? Ming, Cody, what else would you guys like to share in closing? Any closing sharing remarks, hopes and dreams?
I mean, I just can't, I wish, see, so this is where my inability to call upon my thinking or my feeling function tends to not serve me, right? So von Franz tells the story about a young man who was a thinking type, and a good friend of his passed, and when this happened, this man went home and he cried and he felt all of his feelings. And then a week later, he went to the funeral and he was facing his friend's wife and he couldn't recall any feelings. He just almost came across as a person who has no feelings. And that's because that feeling function is, it doesn't, so that it doesn't come up at the right time, right? So what I want to say within that context is just how grateful I've been for you guys, for your support, to be able to come and present to you. It's been I just can't, it's probably one of the most important, 6 months of my life. I'm very, very grateful. And I wish I could pull more of the feeling out I don't want to come across as a person who's just unable to sort of access that emotion, but I really feel it. So probably later today, I'll really begin to grieve and just, whereas at this moment I'm struggling to come up with words to really express just how grateful I am. So.
Thank you, Cody. Ming, you want to say anything? Cody's sidekick, Ming, folks. The lovely Ming. Ming, the wise. Ming, we're starting your series in a couple of weeks. Everybody watch the WhatsApp. We're going to have Ming, the wisdom of Ming, and a long series. I'm sure it'll take a long time to draw all the ancient wisdom from this young woman. I guess we'll be talking backstage about what we may do next soon. I would sure love to keep something going on these Tuesdays. I'll talk with Patrick. Maybe we'll meet here again next Tuesday just for people that have been here all this time, just to have a chance to share for a while. I could be open to hosting just a sharing group for the people that have been traumatized or enlightened by Cody Peterson and Ming. You might need some time to decompress, share freely without Cody in the room and so forth. Maybe we'll do that next week. I don't know. So if you're really missing us next Tuesday, just maybe try getting in here and see if we've been able to break in
Yeah.
and just start squatting on this Tuesday's time slot at Friendly Circle Berlin. We're taking over. We're taking over.
So
Um,
let I'm gonna stop the recording, but let me comment on that too real